Hey, this is Cameron. Welcome back to the Busy Gardener channel. Hey, today we are going to take time to put this pomegranate juice to the test to make some pomegranate jelly. Let's get busy. So in a previous video, I showed how to take pomegranates, cut them in half, smack them over a big 5-gallon bucket, and then I put them through a juicer, and that left us with this. Right here is about a gallon of pomegranate juice, hard-won pomegranate juice. When I say hard-won, it's because it took a long time. The juicing itself only took about 5 minutes, but the getting all of the arils out of the pomegranates to fill almost a 5-gallon bucket took a solid couple of hours. By the end of it, I had a pretty good rhythm down. Anyway, the thing that's exciting about that, in addition to just drinking it straight up, which is so good, is I've got all of my jars out. We're gonna make some pomegranate jelly today. I've done this, I think this might actually be the very first jelly that I ever created, was pomegranate jelly a few years ago. Since then, I've made a few others. I've made some boysenberry jelly and jam and blackberry jam, some plum jam. But pomegranate seems to be a favorite. Spread it over some fresh baked bread. Hey. Thumbs up for fresh baked bread. Woo. Yeah, she makes this awesome bread, and so fresh baked. It's warm. Put a little butter on it and some pomegranate jelly. So tasty. The cool thing is it takes just a few ingredients to do this. So we have obviously our pomegranate juice. We also needed some, I think for the recipe calls for like a 1/4 cup of lemon juice. So I went up to the orchard and grabbed a handful of lemons. Still a little green, but it'll get the job done. And then what we need to use is a box of pectin. That's not pectin, that's a box of lids. It doesn't help when they look similar. So a box of pectin, they have a few different types of pectin. Pectin is essentially that agent that as it's in there allows it to gel up and creates that jammy consistency that we're so used to when you're able to take a knife and take it out and it stays on the knife kind of jellyish and spreading it out. So without pectin, you're really unable to have it solidify. So there are a couple of different types of pectin. There's one like this one that's really low or no sugar. Then there are others, which I use, which are the regular ones. Because we're not using a ton of fruit, we're mainly just using the juice. And so I'm gonna be doing a higher sugar pectin for this recipe. I'm going to link the recipe that I'm using in the description below, so check it out. Hey, look what else I'm sporting. Do you see the new Busy Gardener shirts? They're out. This is exciting. There's a link to that in the description too. If you want to get your own, sport your own, and rep your own Busy Gardener shirt. I think it'd just blow my mind if I ever saw somebody wearing one of those things. It'd be so much fun. Okay, let's get cooking. A tip that I learned early on by accident is get your water boiling. If there's a big like crock, or this is essentially a pressure cooker without a lid on it right now. I use this for all my canning. Get this boiling early. It takes forever for water to boil, and you can almost get done with every other step by the time that thing is boiling and ready to go. It's always easy to keep it near a boil and bring the temperature down if you need to, but get that boiling early on. That'll save you a lot of headache and waiting later. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to be doubling up a recipe. So I just put out a ton of these. Some of it's going to have to do with how much space we have in that, and how many we're able to stack on top of each other is going to help dictate what that's going to look like. Doing the hot water bath method as opposed to just the quick and easy method, the instant method where you just kind of boil it and throw it in there in the jars. I want to take it and let it cook in there for a few minutes. In our elevation, it calls for like 6 minutes of boiling. So that way the actual jelly itself cooks and any pathogens that are in there die. And that way it ends up being shelf stable, so we can leave it on our shelf for, several months and it stays good. And so we'll talk through what some of that looks like in a bit. The first thing I need to do is I need to start getting these jars ready and kind of setting some stuff aside, getting my lids ready and some of my equipment that I'm going to be using, and I'll talk through what I'm using for that. So I have a handful of things that I need to get prepped. I need to get the lemon juice. I have to take a look and at what the recipe is going to call for. That's what's nice. I'm using this MCP. This is by the makers of surejell. The difference is though that each of these packets makes a larger quantity of jam. And I want to make a large quantity of jam, not a little quantity of jam. And so I'm using MCP because one of these ends up yielding a bit more. It's cool. In every one of these things, they give you like a recipe, and it lets you know how much of each ingredient you ought to use, so that way it safely stores. Let's see, cooked jam recipes, cooked jelly recipes. I'm not actually going to follow these ingredients, even though these would be great. They don't have an actual pomegranate recipe, and the recipe that I've used before is specifically for pomegranate, and it works really well. So I'm going to take a look at it. So this pomegranate jelly recipe, again, I'm going to link it. Cuts to the chase pretty quick, thankfully. And so it's telling me that I need 4 cups of pomegranate juice. Although if I'm using MCP, it's telling me to use 3 cups of pomegranate juice, 4 cups of sugar, and 1/4 cup of lemon juice per 1 package. I'm gonna get squeezing on these lemons. Okay, we've got our lemons all squeezed. We've got probably about 1/2 cup or so, or maybe a little bit more of lemon juice, so I'll leave that kind of sitting in there. Give these here for the chickens to munch on later. I'm going to talk through some of the equipment that I'm using for canning. One of them is the jar itself. There's another piece. This is the ring, and then each of these jars has a lid, and this probably looks pretty familiar to you. Now, in case you've not done this before, the lid has kind of a gummy substance around the edge, and when that's in there and boiling, that gummy part gets nice and soft. And so as this heats up, air is escaping, and then as it cools down, you hear that kind of pop? That pop sound is the pop. As it's cooling down, it creates a vacuum in there, and that lets you know that this is done and cooked. If you're clicking on it, if you ever hear that, with something that's been sitting on your shelf that you haven't previously opened, and that thing has gone bad and you want to throw it out. When we're making it here, we're going to be listening for that. I want every single one of these to properly seal, and I'll know that it's properly sealed by that clicking sound. So anyway, that is then put on there, and it's secured with the lid, like that. It doesn't have to be stored. With the ring. It doesn't have to be stored with the ring. But when you're creating it, you don't want that lid to be floating around. It kind of keeps the lid nice and in place, so that way it's able to seal properly. So what we need to do is we need to load up another couple of tools that we use. One is this thing. This is great because this essentially is a little rack for sterilizing. You want to sterilize all this stuff in the boiling water ahead of time. So I'm able to put the lids on there, and the rings can drop on here. I just put this whole thing inside the boiling water over there. Another thing that's really helpful, one thing that's really helpful, there are a few things that are helpful, is this jar grabber. This is helpful for when you're putting jars in and out of there. It's rubberized, and so you just put that over the edge, and by squeezing on it, you're able to get kind of a really good affirmative grip on there and to pull those out of the water. There are a couple of other tools, but finally are these two things. One is this little guy. Undoubtedly, inevitably, some lid falls in. This is magnetic, so it allows you to reach in there and grab it magnetically. And I think finally here is this little depth gauge. When you're storing this, you want these to be a certain number of parts of an inch from the top. And that kind of creates a head space there, so that way it doesn't bubble over as it heats up. And so this has little indentations on it, as you see, little stair steppers, and each indentation is a certain height. So this is like 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, 3/4, and 1 inch. So these are some tools that make this really easy, so you're not having to guess or eyeball this stuff. Okay, now I'm going to take a minute to throw some of the stuff in here that we're going to sterilize. And while that's sterilizing, we're going to begin working on the actual recipe. So let's throw all of this stuff in there to sterilize. Oh yeah. Yeah, I created like a cannonball effect and splashed my face. In this case, I'm going to be doubling the recipe. And so it's calling for 3 cups pomegranate juice, 1/4 cup lemon juice, 4 cups of sugar, and 1 package of pectin. So the first thing I need to do is I need to put in the pomegranate juice, the lemon juice, and the pectin, and bring that to a rolling boil. So I'm going to do that now. So while this is heating up, I'm going to take the jars out of there. I'm also going to measure out separately all of the sugar. So I'm going to need 8 cups of sugar set aside because I'm going to want to be able to stir that in pretty quickly. So I'm going to put that in a bowl separately. So I'm going to put these on a cookie sheet, these jars that have been sterilizing. I'm going to set that sugar aside, and I'm going to keep stirring this just so that it's going to be ready for us once we dump the sugar in. Okay, so once this starts boiling as like a rolling boil, essentially a boil where you're not able to, like stirring isn't going to make it drop back down like it is now. This is kind of almost boiling over. It tells me to, oh yeah, there's a good boil there. Yep, those bubbles are coming up no matter what. So now is where we're going to stir in our sugar. Once we stir in the sugar, we're going to spend 2 minutes stirring it and letting it come back to a nice big boil. So that way this is getting all cooked and all activated. Wow, that was incredible. Adding that sugar really clarified it. Yeah, amazing how that did that. I was surprised that the sugar didn't take up more space inside our pot here. I wonder how many of those 19 jars we're actually going to use. Now I probably have more jars than I'm going to need, and that's a good thing because if we end up needing more jars, it would be a shame to to have too few jars than too many. This is probably pretty tasty as a jelly, but probably pretty nasty as a drink. So yeah, so we're just going to look for this to get back to a rolling boil, and once it does that, again, that boil that we're not able to keep down by stirring, it's going to start the 2-minute timer for this being done. And I'm going to pre-position our jars here, so that way once this is ready to get ladled, I'm just going to go straight in and start ladling this stuff. Something I also have that's also really helpful, I didn't show you earlier, one of these canning funnels. It keeps the edges nice and clean, and it also gives you a larger target when you're ladling this, because this is a little bit time sensitive. All right, I'm pulling an audible at the last second. I have these tiny little gift size jars, and I'm gonna sterilize these really quick and probably replace, I don't know, 5 or 6 of these with these little small sized ones, so that way I can give some of these out as gifts. I realized, we've got this beautiful harvest out there. We've got these resources we like to be able to share, so I'm going to sterilize these quick. Now the instruction is to let this thing sit for 1 minute and let those kind of bubbles be there, and then I'll be able to go and skim all of that bubbly stuff off the top and be able to ladle this into our jars. Okay, now we're going to take and wipe the top of each of these lids so that way it doesn't impact us having a good seal. So we're going to wipe off the top of them, the top of the jars rather, so that way there's nothing that's kind of propping up the lids once we put them on there. So I'm just using a damp paper towel, damp rag will work fine too. Okay, so we've got this at a gentle boil, and so now I'm going to start transferring in the jars, and then I'm going to put 1 layer of jars down, and then I've got this grate that goes on top that allows me to put a second layer of jars on. So I'm going to start these in. I'm going to start with the larger jars at the bottom. Mainly so I don't have to reach so far down to get them. So while these jars are kind of cooking in here, we've got about 3.5 minutes left, I like to come and see the consistency and how the kind of preview the jelly here. So I'm going to see if it's kind of jellyish. Oh yeah. That's tasty. That's going to be nice. You know, this jelly is really mild tasting, considering how tart and how flavorful pomegranates are. These are surprisingly not super tart or super flavorful, in the same way that like my plum jam is just bursting with it. So it's kind of interesting that it doesn't take on as much of the character, but it's certainly more than just gelatin and water. It definitely has a taste. It's just not, I don't know, I just expect it to be more vigorous than it is. It's still tasty. It's always a hit whenever we make it. Because I got some spare juice, I figure have a nice little drink of fresh squeezed pomegranate juice. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Just enough. Delicious. It's time to get them out. I like to put a couple of dish rags down to put them on, so that way they don't touch the really cold countertop and shatter all of a sudden. So what I'll do is I'll put these out to that and all the dripping water. All right, I heard ya. Okay, as I get the last couple of these out of here, I want you to, did you hear that click? You hear those clicks? Those are good. Those mean that we likely have good seals on these things because those are clicking shut. As they cool down, that means that they're creating a vacuum seal where the air is kind of pulling in. So you usually want to wait an entire day to see if these things seal, or if they keep their seal. And anything that doesn't seal properly doesn't mean you have to throw it out right away. It just means you need to put it in your refrigerator, and that's the first one that you eat. Music to my ears. Okay, so earlier I talked about what happens if these jars don't seal. And the way you can tell if one doesn't seal is if it clicks. If that clicks, that means that this does not have a seal. Same thing is true here. The other ones are totally flat. There's not a bubble that can even be pushed. But these two will have to go in the refrigerator right away. Not right away, not this minute, but once they've cooled down a little bit. Let's see. And it looks like one of our little gift ones is also messed up. So, not a big deal. 3 out of them, 3 out of 16 of them. We'll just go in our fridge and we'll eat those. The rest can go up in the pantry, or it can be given away as gifts. Well, this has sure been a lot of fun. Taking the stuff that's out in the orchard and bringing it in here, processing it, using it for something that's going to allow us to enjoy these pomegranates for months to come. You know, pomegranates are ready now in what, October? Maybe some in November, and yet we're going to, because of this way that we're preserving or creating these jellies, we're going to be able to enjoy a yummy pomegranate flavor in May and in July when there's not a pomegranate in sight. And this is fun. I'm glad I did these small ones. These are going to be fun little gifts I could give away, give to some of the part of my team at the office or some of our community group that meets here. I'm definitely going to eat these things. It'll be nice to change up some of the plum and pomegranate jelly. So I'm glad we did this. We ended up with, let's see, I got 2, 4, 6, 8 ounce ones, so 64 ounces of that in those containers, and then 2, 4, 6, 8 of the 4 ounce ones, so another 32 ounces. So not bad. I think I might make another batch tomorrow and see how that goes, see if it turns out any different. But this is fun. What are some jelly recipes that you have? What are some ways that you've used produce from your orchard to make some sort of jellies or preserves? Hey, take a second if you haven't already and subscribe. It'd be huge for you to do that. Love for you to like this video. Also hit that notification bell so that way you know when I post new videos, they're gonna come up for you. Hey, sure appreciate you tuning in, whether you've got 1 tree in your orchard or 500. Until next time, stay busy.